Today, we are going to look at the most horrifying snake attacks ever recorded, from a grandfather who only wanted to protect his family to a researcher's final moment as they encountered a deadly reptile. Let's dive straight in. It was March 15th, 2023, when the Amazon rainforest of Peru claimed the life of a seasoned researcher in one of the most remote scientific outposts on Earth. The research station, nestled deep within the Madre de Dios region, sat surrounded by dense jungle canopy that filtered sunlight into dappled shadows across the forest floor. Recent flooding from the rainy season had transformed normally passable trails into treacherous waterways, forcing most personnel to evacuate weeks earlier. The nearest medical facility lay over 200 miles away through impassable terrain, accessible only by helicopter during favorable weather conditions. Gregory Stanton, a 47-year-old herpetologist with 2 decades of experience studying venomous snakes, had chosen to remain behind despite warnings from station coordinator Maria Santos. His obsession with completing breakthrough research on anti-venom development had consumed his personal life, contributing to his recent divorce and estrangement from colleagues who viewed his methods as increasingly reckless. Dr. James Mitchell, his research partner, was scheduled to arrive the following week, but Gregory's impatience to continue his work had proven fatal. The station's anti-venom supply had expired 3 months prior, with replacement shipments delayed by the severe weather that had also damaged their communication equipment. Gregory's isolation was complete, surrounded by thousands of square miles of impenetrable rainforest. The fer de lance, known scientifically as Bothrops asper, ranks among Central and South America's most dangerous serpents. These pit vipers can reach lengths of 8 feet and possess hemotoxic venom capable of causing severe tissue destruction and internal bleeding. Their heat-sensing pits allow them to detect temperature differences from warm-blooded animals, while their defensive nature when threatened makes them responsible for numerous snakebite fatalities throughout their range. Adult specimens possess fangs up to an inch in length that can penetrate deep into tissue to deliver venom directly into blood vessels and muscle. The venom contains enzymes that break down blood cells and damage blood vessel walls. That morning, Gregory entered the specimen room to extract venom from a particularly large fer de lance he had captured days earlier. The snake appeared less active from the cool overnight temperature, encouraging Gregory to handle it without proper restraint equipment. As he attempted to grip the serpent behind its head, the snake became agitated by his handling. The fer de lance twisted defensively in his grip, causing Gregory's fingers to slip forward on its neck. In that instant, the snake struck reflexively, driving its fangs deep into Gregory's forearm. The bite delivered a significant amount of potent hemotoxic venom directly into Gregory's tissue. He dropped the snake and stumbled backward, watching 2 puncture wounds begin bleeding steadily. The venom immediately began attacking red blood cells and blood vessel walls throughout his arm. Gregory attempted to apply a makeshift tourniquet using his belt, but the constriction only worsened tissue damage. Within an hour, severe pain radiated up his arm as the toxins spread through his circulatory system. His forearm began swelling noticeably as internal bleeding increased and tissue around the bite site started breaking down. He attempted to reach the damaged radio equipment, but found his coordination gradually deteriorating. The hemotoxic venom caused progressive destruction of blood cells throughout his body, leading to internal hemorrhaging. Gregory's condition fluctuated over several hours, with periods where he felt slightly better, followed by worsening symptoms. His arm became severely swollen and discolored as tissue death spread from the bite site. Blood began seeping from his gums and nose as the venom affected his blood's ability to clot properly. After 12 hours, Gregory's blood pressure dropped dangerously low as his kidneys struggled to filter the massive amounts of destroyed tissue and cellular debris. The venom had caused such extensive blood cell destruction that his kidneys began failing. Gregory experienced episodes of confusion and weakness as his body's systems became overwhelmed. His breathing became labored as fluid accumulated in his lungs from the failing cardiovascular system. Gregory lost consciousness as his body went into shock from blood loss and organ failure. The combination of severe tissue destruction, kidney failure, and cardiovascular vascular collapse overwhelmed his body's ability to survive. He died from multiple organ failure 18 hours after the bite, alone in the remote research station, with only the sounds of the rainforest surrounding his final moments. Station personnel discovered Gregory's body when Dr. Mitchell arrived a week later, finding his colleague collapsed beside the damaged radio equipment. The makeshift tourniquet remained around his severely swollen and blackened arm. Peruvian authorities launched an investigation into safety protocols at remote research facilities, while the scientific community mourned the loss of a respected but controversial researcher. Gregory's ex-wife released a statement expressing grief while noting his dangerous obsession with his work had ultimately cost him his life. The research station was temporarily closed pending a comprehensive safety review, and new protocols were implemented requiring minimum 2-person teams for all venomous snake handling. Gregory Stanton's story showed how overconfidence can prove fatal in remote places. For Dylan Reeves, it wasn't isolation that threatened him, but a grandfather's protective instincts facing Arizona's deadliest serpent. It was August 3rd, 2023, when a family barbecue in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, turned into a nightmare that would claim the life of a beloved grandfather. The Reeves family home sat on a sprawling 2-acre lot in the Ahwatukee foothills, where desert landscape met residential development. The property backed up against undeveloped desert terrain, creating a natural corridor for wildlife seeking water and shelter during the scorching summer months when temperatures regularly exceeded 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Dylan Reeves, a 67-year-old retired elementary school teacher, had spent the morning preparing for his monthly family gathering. His daughter Jennifer, a registered nurse, had arrived early with her children Tommy and Sarah, ages 6 and 8 respectively. Dylan's backyard featured a large garden area where he grew vegetables and maintained a small pond that attracted various desert creatures. The recent extreme heat had driven wildlife closer to residential areas in search of water sources. Dylan suffered from a heart condition requiring daily medication, but had forgotten to take his morning dose due to the excitement of preparing for the family gathering. He remained active and devoted to his grandchildren's safety above all else. The western diamondback rattlesnake ranks as Arizona's most dangerous serpent and one of North America's most formidable pit vipers. These snakes can reach lengths of 5 feet and possess hemotoxic venom designed to break down blood cells and tissue over time. Their distinctive diamond-patterned scales provide perfect camouflage among desert rocks and vegetation. Western diamondbacks are highly defensive when threatened and can strike across distances up to half their body length. Their venom contains enzymes that gradually destroy red blood cells, damage blood vessel walls, and prevent proper blood clotting, with effects typically developing over many hours. The encounter occurred when Tommy discovered a large western diamondback coiled near Dylan's garden pond, where it had come to drink during the afternoon heat. Dylan immediately moved the children to safety and grabbed a garden rake, intending to guide the snake back toward the desert. As he carefully maneuvered the rake near the 4-foot rattlesnake, the defensive serpent struck quickly, its fangs penetrating through Dylan's thin gardening glove into his wrist before he could pull back. The bite delivered venom into the tissue of Dylan's wrist through 2 distinct puncture wounds. Jennifer immediately applied pressure to control the bleeding while calling emergency services. Dylan remained calm and alert, reassuring his frightened grandchildren while they waited for help. The bite site began showing mild swelling and discoloration, but Dylan's symptoms initially appeared manageable. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes and transported him to the nearest trauma center, where emergency physicians began monitoring his condition and administered supportive care. Dylan's initial recovery progressed normally for the first several hours. The swelling in his arm increased gradually, and he experienced moderate pain that was controlled with medication. However, the combination of extreme heat, dehydration from working outdoors, and his missed heart medication created dangerous conditions. As evening approached, Dylan's cardiovascular system began showing signs of stress from fighting the venom effects and the day's physical demands. 8 hours after the bite, Dylan's condition suddenly deteriorated. His blood pressure became unstable as the venom's effects on his blood cells and vessels combined with his underlying heart condition. The stress of envenomation, dehydration, and missed cardiac medication created a perfect storm of complications. Dylan began experiencing chest pain and irregular heart rhythms as his compromised cardiovascular system struggled to cope with the physiological demands. Despite being in a medical facility with immediate access to advanced cardiac care, Dylan suffered a massive heart attack 10 hours after the snakebite. The combination of venom effects, heat exhaustion, dehydration, and his pre-existing heart condition had overwhelmed his body's ability to maintain normal circulation. Medical staff performed aggressive resuscitation efforts, but Dylan's heart could not recover from the multiple stressors. He died from cardiac arrest caused by the combined effects of snake envenomation complications and underlying cardiovascular disease. The incident prompted Phoenix City officials to review wildlife management policies in desert-adjacent neighborhoods. The Arizona Game and Fish Department issued new guidelines for homeowners about creating barriers around water features and proper response procedures when encountering venomous reptiles. Jennifer Reeves established a foundation promoting snakebite awareness and the importance of medication compliance in elderly patients. The family received hundreds of condolence messages from former students whose lives Dylan had touched during his teaching career. Medical experts noted that Dylan's case highlighted the importance of consistent medication schedules and hydration, especially for elderly individuals living in desert environments. Dylan Reeves showed how health complications can prove fatal, even with medical care. For Jasmine Cole, it wasn't protective instincts, but teenage recklessness that led her to Georgia's deadliest serpent. It was June 18, 2023, when a teenage dare in rural Georgia turned deadly at an abandoned textile warehouse outside Valdosta. The crumbling industrial building had sat empty for over a decade, its broken windows and collapsed sections creating perfect shelter for wildlife seeking cool, dark spaces during the sweltering summer heat. The warehouse's basement storage areas provided ideal denning sites for Georgia's most dangerous reptiles. Jasmine Cole, a 17-year-old high school senior, had driven to the location with 4 friends seeking content for her social media accounts. Known for posting increasingly dangerous stunts to gain followers, Jasmine had built a reputation for taking risks that others wouldn't consider. Her boyfriend Marcus Johnson frequently encouraged these activities, while her best friend Ashley Martinez had grown concerned about Jasmine's escalating behavior. 2 years earlier, Jasmine had been bitten by a copperhead during a camping trip, requiring hospital treatment and creating potential sensitivity to snake venom proteins. The eastern diamondback rattlesnake stands as the largest venomous snake in North America and Georgia's most formidable serpent. These massive pit vipers can exceed 6 feet in length and possess the most potent venom of any North American rattlesnake. Their distinctive diamond pattern provides excellent camouflage among fallen leaves and debris. Eastern diamondbacks prefer secluded areas like abandoned buildings where they can establish dens. Their venom contains powerful hemotoxic compounds that destroy blood cells and tissue, along with proteins that can trigger severe allergic reactions in previously sensitized individuals. The group entered the warehouse through a broken loading dock door and began exploring before descending into the basement storage area. In a corner room filled with old machinery and concrete debris, they discovered a massive eastern diamondback coiled in the shadows. Upon detecting the intruders, the rattlesnake began vibrating its tail and raising its head in a defensive posture. Marcus immediately dared Jasmine to approach the agitated snake for a close-up video. Despite Ashley's attempts to physically stop her, Jasmine pushed past her friend to accept the challenge. Jasmine activated her phone's camera and began approaching the defensive rattlesnake, narrating her actions for the video. The snake continued rattling loudly as she moved closer, its heat-sensing pits tracking her movement. When Jasmine extended her phone to within 18 inches of the serpent, the eastern diamondback struck with explosive speed. Its massive fangs penetrated deep into her forearm, injecting a large amount of venom before she could react. Jasmine screamed and jerked backward as the snake maintained its grip briefly before releasing and coiling defensively again. The bite created 2 deep puncture wounds that began bleeding profusely. Her friends rushed to help as Marcus called emergency services while Ashley applied pressure to the wounds. The group helped Jasmine outside to wait for the ambulance, with her remaining conscious initially. However, within 10 minutes of the bite, Jasmine began developing symptoms that indicated her body was having an abnormal reaction to the venom due to her previous snakebite exposure. Red welts appeared across Jasmine's skin as her immune system recognized the similar venom proteins from her earlier copperhead bite. Her breathing became increasingly labored as her throat began swelling from the allergic reaction. The anaphylactic response progressed rapidly, with Jasmine's airway constricting as her body released massive amounts of histamine. Her friends watched helplessly as she struggled to breathe, her face and neck swelling visibly. Jasmine's condition deteriorated rapidly as anaphylactic shock set in. Her blood pressure dropped dramatically while her heart rate increased as her cardiovascular system struggled to maintain circulation. The swelling in her throat became so severe that air could barely pass through her airway. Her skin turned blue from lack of oxygen as respiratory failure began. 15 minutes after the bite, Jasmine lost consciousness as her brain was deprived of adequate oxygen. The remote location delayed emergency response, with paramedics arriving 28 minutes after the initial call. They immediately recognized the signs of severe anaphylaxis combined with snake envenomation. The team performed emergency intubation and administered epinephrine, corticosteroids, and antivenom treatment. However, Jasmine had been without adequate oxygen for over 10 minutes. Her brain had suffered significant damage from the prolonged hypoxia. Despite aggressive treatment, Jasmine's condition continued to deteriorate. The combination of severe allergic reaction, massive envenomation, and prolonged oxygen deprivation had caused irreversible damage to multiple organ systems. Jasmine died from respiratory failure and cardiovascular collapse caused by anaphylactic shock triggered by her previous sensitization to snake venom proteins. The incident prompted Georgia authorities to increase security around abandoned buildings and launch investigations into social media challenges involving dangerous wildlife encounters. Jasmine's school district implemented new programs educating students about the risks of seeking online fame through dangerous activities. Jasmine Cole's tragedy showed how previous wildlife encounters can create deadly complications. For Spencer Wallace, it wasn't recklessness, but family responsibilities that led him to Louisiana's most elusive and deadly serpent. It was September 12th, 2023, when the demands of supporting a young family led to a deadly encounter at a rural auto repair shop outside Lafayette, Louisiana. The small garage sat isolated along a seldom-traveled back road, surrounded by dense cypress swamps that provided perfect habitat for the region's most secretive serpents. The shop's location meant that wildlife frequently sought shelter in dark spaces beneath the building during cooler autumn nights. Spencer Wallace, a 28-year-old mechanic, had been working at the shop for 3 years while supporting his wife, Maria, and their 6-month-old daughter. Known for his willingness to help stranded motorists regardless of the hour, Spencer often took emergency calls to supplement his modest income. That night, he had received a call from a driver whose car had broken down on the remote highway. Spencer's dedication to providing for his growing family had led him to work increasingly long hours, often alone at the shop during nights and weekends. The eastern coral snake represents one of North America's most dangerous yet elusive serpents, despite its small size and secretive nature. These brightly banded snakes rarely exceed 3 feet in length, but possess potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system with deadly efficiency. Their distinctive red, yellow, and black bands serve as a warning, though their shy disposition means encounters with humans are extremely rare. Unlike rattlesnakes, coral snakes deliver venom through small, fixed fangs that inject neurotoxins evolved to paralyze prey. The venom works slowly and silently, producing minimal initial symptoms while gradually shutting down the victim's respiratory system. The customer's vehicle had been sitting motionless for several hours when Spencer arrived to begin the emergency repair. He successfully fixed the electrical problem, sending the customer on their way near midnight. Spencer began cleaning up his workspace and organizing tools in the storage area behind the shop. Unknown to him, an eastern coral snake had taken shelter beneath a pile of old tires and automotive parts, seeking protection from the cooling temperatures. Spencer reached into the dark storage area to retrieve a wrench that had fallen behind the tire pile. His hand disturbed the small snake hidden in the debris beneath the stored materials. The startled coral snake, with no escape route available, defensively bit Spencer's index finger before quickly retreating deeper into the pile. Spencer pulled his hand back and used his phone's flashlight, catching a glimpse of the snake's distinctive banded pattern as it disappeared. He examined his finger under the work light, finding only 2 tiny puncture wounds that barely bled. Having grown up in Louisiana, Spencer recognized the coral snake, but had heard conflicting information about their danger level. The bite seemed insignificant compared to rattlesnake encounters he had heard about, leading Spencer to continue his cleanup work. He washed the wound with soap and water, but decided against seeking immediate medical attention due to the late hour and minimal symptoms. The neurotoxic venom began its silent work immediately. Though Spencer noticed no obvious symptoms during the first 2 hours, he finished organizing the shop and completed paperwork, feeling only slight soreness at the bite site. The coral snake's venom contains powerful neurotoxins that block nerve signals throughout the body, but produces few visible external symptoms during early stages. Spencer attributed his mild fatigue to the late hour and long workday. Over the next 4 hours, Spencer began experiencing subtle symptoms that he dismissed as exhaustion. Slight dizziness and mild nausea seemed consistent with working past midnight, while barely perceptible weakness in his hands appeared related to the repair work. The neurotoxic venom was systematically blocking nerve transmission throughout his body, but the effects remained nearly imperceptible until they reached critical levels. Spencer dozed fitfully in his office chair, unaware his condition was deteriorating. As dawn approached, Spencer's condition deteriorated rapidly as the venom reached his respiratory system. His breathing became increasingly shallow as the neurotoxins paralyzed the muscles responsible for lung function. Spencer attempted to reach his phone, but found his coordination severely impaired. He collapsed at his workbench as respiratory paralysis set in, unable to call for assistance as his nervous system shut down. The venom had silently blocked the nerve signals controlling his breathing, leading to complete respiratory failure. Spencer died from respiratory paralysis caused by eastern coral snake neurotoxins, his body showing no obvious external signs except 2 tiny puncture wounds on his finger. Frank Rodriguez, the shop owner, discovered Spencer's body when he arrived for the morning shift, initially unable to determine the cause until the small bite marks were noticed during medical examination. The incident prompted Louisiana health officials to issue warnings about coral snake encounters in rural work environments. Spencer's family received support from the local community and co-workers, who established a fund for Maria and their infant daughter. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife developed new safety protocols for workers in rural locations. Spencer Wallace showed how small venomous snakes prove deadly when bites go unrecognized. For Natalie Crawford, academic ambition led her to Virginia's mountains facing a seemingly harmless encounter. It was October 7th, 2023, when academic ambition led to a fatal encounter in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia. Natalie Crawford, a 31-year-old marketing executive, had taken a weekend hiking trip with her boyfriend David Chen to celebrate her recent promotion. The couple had chosen a popular section of the Appalachian Trail near Shenandoah National Park, where well-maintained paths wound through dense hardwood forests. The thick leaf litter covering the forest floor provided perfect camouflage for the region's wildlife. David, a certified EMT with the Richmond Fire Department, had suggested the hiking trip as a way to unwind from Natalie's stressful work schedule. Natalie, an experienced hiker, appeared to be in excellent physical health. However, she had been managing type 2 diabetes for several years and had been under significant stress from working 12-hour days for months. Her compromised immune system from poorly controlled blood sugar levels had left her more vulnerable to infections. The October weather had been unusually warm, creating ideal conditions for reptiles that remained active later into the fall season. The copperhead represents one of the most common venomous snakes in Virginia. These pit vipers typically measure 2 to 3 feet in length and possess distinctive hourglass-shaped crossbands across their copper-colored bodies. Their excellent camouflage among fallen leaves makes them nearly invisible on forest floors during autumn months. Copperheads are generally docile snakes that prefer to remain motionless when threatened, relying on camouflage rather than aggressive behavior. Their hemotoxic venom is relatively mild compared to other pit vipers. While copperhead bites are painful, fatalities are extremely rare in healthy adults. The attack occurred during the afternoon as Natalie and David hiked along a scenic ridge trail. Natalie spotted a beautiful overlook and stepped off the main trail through thick fallen leaves to position herself for a photograph. The dense layer of colorful autumn foliage concealed a copperhead that had been resting in the warm afternoon sun. As Natalie moved into position, she inadvertently stepped within striking distance of the well-camouflaged snake. The copperhead struck defensively, its fangs penetrating through her hiking sock into her ankle. Natalie immediately felt sharp pain and looked down to see the snake quickly retreating. David rushed to her side and immediately recognized the bite, having received snakebite training during his EMT certification. He helped Natalie sit down and examined the wound, finding 2 distinct puncture marks that were bleeding moderately. David immediately called for emergency evacuation while applying basic first aid. A rescue helicopter arrived within 90 minutes and transported Natalie to the University of Virginia Medical Center. Emergency physicians determined that the bite did not require antivenom treatment, since copperhead envenomations rarely cause life-threatening symptoms. Natalie received supportive care, including pain medication, standard antibiotics, and tetanus prophylaxis. Her vital signs remained stable, and the swelling around the bite site was moderate. However, her elevated blood glucose levels from stress created an environment conducive to bacterial growth. Natalie's initial recovery progressed normally over the first 3 days. She was discharged home with oral antibiotics and instructions to monitor the wound site. However, her diabetes had been poorly controlled during the hospitalization due to stress. 2 days after discharge, Natalie developed increasing pain and redness around the wound site. She initially attributed the symptoms to normal recovery and delayed seeking medical attention. The infection had taken hold in the damaged tissue, thriving in the high glucose environment. When she finally returned to the emergency department, bacterial cultures revealed methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, a dangerous antibiotic-resistant strain. Despite immediate admission and aggressive treatment with vancomycin and other powerful antibiotics, the MRSA infection had already spread extensively through her leg tissue. The resistant bacteria proved difficult to control, and the infection progressed to necrotizing fasciitis. Surgeons performed multiple emergency procedures to remove infected tissue, but Natalie's compromised immune system and uncontrolled diabetes hindered her body's ability to fight the infection. The bacteria entered Natalie's bloodstream, causing septic shock as her overwhelmed immune system could not contain the resistant infection. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously while her heart rate increased as her body tried to fight the systemic MRSA infection. Despite intensive care treatment, including multiple powerful antibiotics and surgical debridement, Natalie's organs began failing from overwhelming sepsis. Her kidneys stopped functioning properly, and her cardiovascular system collapsed. Natalie died from septic shock and multiple organ failure 10 days after the original snakebite, killed not by venom but by a resistant bacterial infection that her compromised immune system could not overcome. David remained at her bedside throughout her hospitalization, devastated by how quickly a manageable injury had become fatal. The case prompted Virginia health officials to review protocols for treating snake bites in diabetic patients, emphasizing aggressive antibiotic therapy and closer monitoring for patients with compromised immune systems. Natalie Crawford showed how underlying health conditions can turn minor wildlife encounters into fatal complications. It was March 15, 2016, and the sprawling desert landscape outside Phoenix, Arizona, stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun. The isolated ranch-style home sat on 5 acres of scrubland, surrounded by towering saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings that provided perfect habitat for the region's diverse reptile population. The property's remote location, nearly 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, offered complete privacy for activities that most people would consider unthinkably dangerous. Diane Kruger had been living alone in this desert sanctuary for 8 years, ever since her divorce from a husband who couldn't understand her growing fascination with venomous snakes. At 47, the insurance adjuster had transformed her modest home into something resembling a private zoo, with over 30 species of deadly serpents housed in custom-built enclosures throughout every room. What had started as a casual interest in reptiles during a childhood visit to the zoo had evolved into a consuming obsession that dominated every aspect of her life. Diane's collection represented years of careful acquisition through reptile shows, private breeders, and online forums where enthusiasts traded rare specimens. She had no formal training in herpetology or venom extraction, but considered herself an expert through decades of self-study and hands-on experience. Her neighbors remained blissfully unaware of the deadly menagerie living just miles from their own homes, and Diane preferred it that way. The crown jewel of her collection was a magnificent 6-foot eastern diamondback rattlesnake that she had acquired just 2 weeks earlier from a breeder in Georgia. The massive serpent, with its distinctive diamond-patterned scales and considerable size, was regarded as one of the most formidable venomous snakes in North America among experienced handlers. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, with adults commonly reaching 5 to 6 feet in length and weighing several pounds. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, capable of causing rapid swelling, significant tissue damage, clotting disruption, and systemic shock without prompt medical treatment. Large individuals can deliver substantial venom in a single defensive strike, and severe envenomations can become life-threatening if care is delayed, especially in remote areas where response times are extended. That Sunday evening, a partially filled glass of wine was found on the kitchen counter, and feeding tools were laid out nearby, indicating she had been tending to her collection before the incident. The enclosure for the eastern diamondback was open, and the water bowl had been removed, suggesting she began routine cleaning while moving through her feeding tasks. Diane opened the custom-built terrarium and reached across the enclosure to remove the water bowl. Gloves and handling tools were present in the room, but were not in use when responders later examined the scene. The terrarium door was fully open, the bowl was positioned on the table beside her tools, and the placement suggested she was midway through a routine cleaning step when the incident occurred. When investigators arrived, the eastern diamondback was found coiled at the rear of the enclosure, a posture consistent with a defensive response after a disturbance. Based on the angle of the bite marks on Diane's forearm and the blood pattern on the floor, her arm entered the snake's strike range while she was reaching inside the enclosure. Eastern diamondbacks deliver extremely fast defensive strikes, and the wound spacing matched a rapid forward extension typical for the species. The puncture depth on her forearm indicated a full strike and release, which aligns with the species' normal behavior. Large rattlesnakes typically inject significant venom during such strikes, and the immediate swelling and blood loss documented at the scene were consistent with a high-volume envenomation. After striking, the snake retreated to the back corner, where it remained until responders secured it. Blood from the puncture wounds formed a trail from the enclosure toward the adjacent room, indicating she moved away immediately after the bite. Her phone was recovered on the floor nearby, consistent with an attempted call. Rapid swelling, discoloration, and bleeding at the bite site matched significant hemotoxic envenomation. Without antivenom, systemic effects typically progress over hours, producing increasing weakness and impaired coordination. The extent of swelling, discoloration, and tissue damage observed during examination reflected the progression of untreated hemotoxic envenomation. Such effects can lead to shock and organ failure without rapid antivenom administration, and the remote location significantly delayed any chance of medical intervention. With no access to immediate care, she deteriorated over the next several hours and ultimately lost consciousness inside the home. A postal worker discovered Diane's body 3 days later when accumulated mail raised concern. Responding officers found numerous venomous snakes housed throughout the residence, some in improvised enclosures, but all were contained. Wildlife officials temporarily seized the animals for evaluation and initiated a review of her permits and housing conditions. Local authorities later examined existing exotic animal oversight procedures but did not implement immediate law changes. But Diane wasn't the only snake enthusiast whose expertise failed them when it mattered most. In Florida, a respected researcher's overconfidence would prove fatal during what should have been a routine procedure. It was August 22, 2014, and the small private herpetology research lab where Dr. Michael Webb worked had already gone quiet for the evening. The facility sat on the outskirts of a rural Florida town, housed in a modest single-story building used by a handful of contracted researchers studying regional reptile species. After hours, the empty hallways, locked offices, and dim lighting gave the place a stillness that often left late-working staff completely alone. Dr. Michael Webb had been working late in the lab for weeks, driven by mounting pressure to produce results necessary to renew his research contract. At 38, the respected herpetologist had built his reputation on groundbreaking studies of coral snake neurotoxins, but recent funding cuts had forced him to accelerate his research timeline. His colleagues had gone home hours earlier, leaving Michael alone with his specimens and his growing sense of urgency. Michael's research focused on the unique properties of coral snake venom, which differed significantly from the hemotoxic venoms of rattlesnakes and vipers. His work had potential applications for developing new neurological medications, but the delicate process of venom extraction required precise timing and absolute safety protocols. Internal emails and previous lab notes showed he frequently expressed frustration with what he considered overly cautious procedures. The lab's safety regulations required 2 researchers to be present during any venom extraction procedures, along with comprehensive protective equipment and emergency protocols. Michael had been circumventing these rules for months, working alone after hours to avoid oversight and accelerate his research progress. Coral snakes are among North America's most medically significant venomous snakes. Despite their small size and reclusive behavior, these slender reptiles rarely exceed 2 feet in length, but their venom contains neurotoxins that interfere with nerve signaling and can lead to progressive paralysis. Early symptoms may include subtle changes such as slurred speech or difficulty swallowing, with respiratory impairment developing later as the paralysis advances. Because coral snake bites often produce little pain, minimal swelling, and only tiny puncture marks, the envenomation can appear deceptively mild at first, with serious symptoms emerging gradually over several hours if untreated. That Friday evening, Michael was working with a particularly active coral snake specimen that had been recently captured for his research. The small serpent, with its distinctive red, black, and yellow banded pattern, appeared far less imposing than the larger vipers he regularly handled. Its small size and bright coloration, traits that often lead handlers to underestimate coral snakes, had been noted in Michael's previous handling logs, providing context for the reduced caution seen in the footage that night. Michael performed the venom extraction procedure without the required second researcher present, as confirmed by facility access logs and internal camera footage. Handling tools were available on the workstation, but the footage showed him attempting to position the coral snake manually rather than following the lab's standard restraint protocols. As he adjusted his grip, the coral snake delivered a quick, close-range bite to his thumb, a common defensive response during handling. Footage showed the snake maintaining contact for a brief moment, long enough to allow venom delivery, which is typical when coral snakes secure a bite rather than striking and releasing. The small fangs produced 2 faint punctures, and available footage showed him repositioning the animal immediately afterward, unaware of the severity of the envenomation. The bite appeared minor, leaving only tiny puncture marks with no immediate pain or swelling, features typical of coral snake envenomation. Security footage captured him returning to his workstation and continuing his notes, behavior consistent with not recognizing the bite as medically serious serious. Within about 30 minutes, Michael began showing early signs of neurotoxic envenomation. Lab timestamps and handwriting irregularities in his notes indicated slurred speech and visual difficulty, symptoms consistent with interference of cranial nerve function caused by coral snake venom. As the evening progressed, his condition worsened. Object handling captured on camera became increasingly uncoordinated, and a recorded attempt to call for help revealed speech that was difficult to understand. The call did not provide enough information for dispatchers to identify his location or the nature of his emergency. Neurotoxic effects continued to develop, leading to progressive muscle weakness and impaired respiratory function. Footage showed him bracing against the desk, with increasingly shallow breathing consistent with advancing paralysis of the muscles needed for respiration. Sometime later that night, Michael lost consciousness at his workstation as respiratory failure progressed. With the facility locked for the evening and no co-workers present, there was no opportunity for timely assistance. He was found the following morning during a routine security check. The subsequent investigation documented repeated violations of safety protocols and a pattern of working alone with venomous specimens. Following the incident, the lab's management reviewed and tightened its internal procedures, emphasizing proper oversight and mandatory two-person operations during high-risk work. Yet lab researchers weren't the only people whose familiarity with venomous snakes led to fatal mistakes. In Texas, a veterinary technician's first encounter with an exotic species would prove to be her last. It was June 8, 2017. And the suburban neighborhood in Houston, Texas buzzed with the typical activity of a warm summer evening. Children played in front yards while parents tended gardens, and neighbors chatted over fence lines, creating the picture of American suburban tranquility. Behind the walls of one modest ranch home, however, a far more dangerous reality existed that none of the friendly neighbors could have imagined. Jennifer Valdez had been living her double life for over 2 years, maintaining the appearance of a normal 29-year-old veterinary technician while secretly housing a collection of exotic venomous snakes in her spare bedroom. Her work at a local animal clinic had sparked an interest in reptiles that quickly evolved into an obsession with the most dangerous species she could legally acquire. Jennifer's collection had grown through careful purchases at reptile shows and online dealers, where she had built relationships with breeders who specialized in venomous species. She kept her hobby completely secret from friends, family, and co-workers, knowing that most people would consider her passion both dangerous and irresponsible. Her latest acquisition was a juvenile gaboon viper that she had purchased from a private breeder just 1 month earlier. The snake represented a significant step up in danger from her previous collection of rattlesnakes and copperheads. Records from her purchases and handling logs showed she had been gradually acquiring more challenging species, indicating a consistent pattern of increasing risk in the reptiles she chose to keep. Gaboon vipers are large African vipers, known for their thick bodies, broad heads, and exceptionally long fangs relative to their size. Adult specimens can exceed 6 feet and weigh more than 20 pounds, but juveniles, like the one Jennifer kept, are smaller with proportionally shorter fangs. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic and cytotoxic, capable of causing extensive tissue damage, severe bleeding, and dangerous drops in blood pressure, if not treated quickly. Although the species is capable of delivering large venom volumes, the effects vary depending on the size of the snake and the depth of the bite. Jennifer prepared to transfer the gaboon viper into a secured holding tub so she could perform routine enclosure maintenance. The open tub, a snake hook, and cleaning tools were found arranged beside the terrarium, indicating she was in the middle of a standard transfer procedure rather than casual cleaning. The position of the overturned tub and scattered equipment showed that the snake slipped from the hook during the transfer, landing on the enclosure floor near the opening. Gaboon vipers are heavy-bodied ambush predators, and even smaller specimens can shift their weight unexpectedly during handling. Based on the viper's final position, it had come to rest only a short distance from Jennifer's reach. When she attempted to redirect it toward the tub, the snake reacted at close range. From this short distance, the gaboon viper thrust forward in a powerful ambush-style strike. Bite marks on Jennifer's forearm showed deep penetration from fangs consistent with a juvenile specimen, and the surrounding blood blood pattern indicated a rapid, high-volume envenomation. After biting, the snake remained near the enclosure opening until responders later secured it. Evidence of the envenomation's effects appeared quickly. Blood droplets and a smeared handprint on the hallway wall showed she tried to steady herself as she moved toward the living room. Her bag of cleaning supplies was found overturned near the couch, suggesting she may have reached for it out of habit before her strength declined. Over the next 30 to 60 minutes, swelling and bleeding at the bite site progressed, and indicators in the living room, a collapsed posture near the couch and pooled blood on the floor, showed she attempted to sit before losing consciousness. When paramedics entered the home, they found Jennifer unresponsive and in cardiac arrest. Despite resuscitation attempts, the severity of the envenomation and the absence of appropriate antivenom in the region left no viable path for reversal. Following her death, wildlife officers initiated a review of her permits and handling practices, and the incident prompted renewed discussion among local officials about the risks associated with keeping exotic venomous species in residential areas. Wildlife officers and animal control personnel secured the Gaboon viper on scene and transported it to a permitted holding facility. The remaining snakes in Jennifer's spare bedroom were removed for evaluation, as several species required state verification of proper documentation. Her employer at the veterinary clinic confirmed that none of the animals had ever been brought onto clinic property, so the workplace remained open, though staff were notified as part of the investigation's standard questioning. The home remained cordoned off for several hours while officers completed enclosure checks and inventory before it was released to her family. No immediate legal penalties were issued, but her permits and housing conditions were formally reviewed as part of routine post-incident procedures. However, exotic pet owners weren't the only people whose religious or personal beliefs put them in mortal danger around venomous snakes. In Tennessee, a preacher's crisis of faith would lead to a deadly test of divine protection. It was September 14th, 2015, and the small mountain chapel tucked deep in a remote Tennessee valley stood silent in the fading light. The wooden structure used for decades by a tiny independent congregation with its own traditions relied on the privacy of the surrounding hills to practice rituals not commonly seen outside the region. Reverend Samuel Briggs had been the spiritual leader of this small congregation for over 2 decades, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, who had established the serpent handling tradition in their family. At 54, Samuel had handled venomous snakes in religious services for most of his adult life, surviving 2 previous bites that he attributed to divine intervention and the power of faith. Samuel's personal collection of rattlesnakes and copperheads was housed in simple wooden boxes behind the church altar, where they waited to be called into service during worship. The snakes were considered sacred instruments of faith based on biblical passages that promised protection from serpents for true believers. Recent entries in Samuel's journals, later reviewed by investigators, described periods of difficulty maintaining the certainty he once expressed during services. Family members also reported that he had been spending more evenings alone at the chapel in the weeks prior, remaining long after scheduled activities had ended. Timber rattlesnakes are large forest-dwelling pit vipers capable of delivering substantial hemotoxic envenomation. Adults commonly reach 4 to 5 feet in length, and their fangs can exceed half an inch. Their venom disrupts blood clotting and damages tissue, and severe untreated bites, especially multiple bites at close range, can become life-threatening over several hours. That Wednesday evening, Samuel entered the empty church alone, carrying his largest timber rattlesnake in a simple wooden box. The massive serpent, nearly 5 feet in length, represented the most dangerous snake in his collection and had been used in countless worship services over the years. Samuel's presence in the chapel that evening was documented only through the items found near the altar: the wooden box, an open Bible, and a chair pulled close to the front. His recent journal entries indicated he had been reflecting on his responsibilities within the congregation, which may explain why he chose to handle the snake alone that night, rather than during a service. When he opened the wooden box and reached inside, the timber rattlesnake reacted defensively to the sudden close contact. In the confined space, Samuel's hand stayed within striking distance as he attempted to lift the snake, and the animal delivered several rapid bites, behavior consistent with close proximity handling incidents documented in similar cases. Bite marks on both hands and forearms showed different angles of penetration, indicating multiple strikes at very short range. Samuel dropped the snake and attempted to return it to its container, but the multiple envenomations had already begun affecting his coordination. Blood droplets on the floor and smudges on the side of a nearby pew indicated he tried to steady himself while moving away from the altar. The effects began progressing within the first hour, with swelling, bleeding, and falling blood pressure worsening steadily as the night went on. Bloodstains near the front pews and the position of a fallen chair suggested he attempted to move toward the exit before collapsing. The hemotoxic venom caused extensive swelling, impaired clotting, and a significant drop in blood pressure, eventually leading to loss of consciousness. Samuel's wife discovered him the following morning when he did not return home. Responders found the wooden box open near the altar and the timber rattlesnake coiled on the floor a short distance away, its location consistent with having been dropped during the handling attempt. Wildlife officers later secured the snake and transferred it to a permitted holding facility for evaluation. The county sheriff's office documented the scene, and the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be complications from untreated hemotoxic envenomation following multiple bites. With no indication of foul play, the investigation remained limited to routine reporting. The small independent congregation later discussed the incident privately, with differing views about the continuation of the long-standing ritual. But religious snake handlers weren't the only people whose work with venomous reptiles carried fatal risks. In another case, a reptile rehabilitator's routine transfer would end in tragedy. It was November 3, 2013, in rural northeastern Namibia. A dry heat lingered under a pale sky as wind pushed dust across stretches of thorn scrub and scattered mopane trees. The tin roof of a small reptile rehabilitation outbuilding clicked softly as the metal shifted in the afternoon breeze. Inside the dim structure, wooden racks held plastic tubs and repurposed glass enclosures labeled in fading marker. The place was quiet in the way remote stations often are, where every sound, from a hinge settling to a sliding bin or a glove brushing plywood, seemed sharper than it should be. Selma Kashipa ran the rescue alone most days. At 41, she had left elementary teaching to take in snakes nobody else wanted, confiscations, surrenders, animals from failed roadside shows. She lived in a small trailer on the edge of the 20-acre property and kept a strict routine: feed logs, cleaning rotations, evening walkthroughs, so inspectors would find order even where money was short. Venomous intakes were recent and often arrived with little notice. She handled them with the tools she could afford and the practices she had learned from manuals and field guides. Donors knew her as steady and practical. She built racks from salvaged lumber, stretched every gallon of disinfectant, and drove borrowed coolers of non-venomous colubrids to school programs on weekends. Local officials started calling when other groups declined to take certain confiscations. Antivenom and rapid transport were not resources she had. Reliable medical support could be hours away. The rescue sat behind a wind-bent line of pines, a sand road cut to the outbuildings, where a lean-to covered 2 long shelves of enclosures. Light bled through board seams. The concrete floor was chalked with lime to mark walking lanes. A portable camera pointed down the main aisle to record husbandry and deter trespassers. Her latest intake that week had been a seized black mamba, taken from a private owner who was keeping it illegally. Black mambas are native African elapids with potent neurotoxic venom and high venom yields for their size. Adults commonly exceed 6 feet in length, move quickly when provoked, and deliver venom that can cause progressive neuromuscular paralysis and respiratory failure without rapid antivenom and airway support. In remote regions where medical access is limited, the risk of rapid respiratory compromise rises substantially. Warnings had been stacking up in small ways. 2 weeks earlier, a volunteer sent photos showing a sagging upper rack. Brackets were rusted, and one screw head rounded smooth. Selma made a note to replace the supports, but kept feeding the animals that day. A notice from regional wildlife authorities had reminded permit holders to avoid solo work with dangerous species and to stage transfers at waist height. She acknowledged the message in a reply, but lacked extra hands. On the afternoon the incident occurred, the video shows her staging the move at dusk. A new glass tank sat on the suspect upper rack. A hook, a clear shield, and a pair of thin work gloves lay within reach. She slid the vented transport tub toward the shelf, left hand under the lip, right hand steadying. As the tub met the shelf edge, the front bracket shifted. The plank dipped a half-inch. The tank slid forward, and she reached to steady multiple enclosures. The mamba was pressed near the handle inside the vented tub. As the sudden slide tilted the container, the lid bounced. She steadied the tub with her left forearm and pushed with her right. The only path the snake had was toward the opening and the large warm object blocking it. From inches away, in confined space, a defensive strike occurred. In the confined opening of the tilted tub, the mamba delivered a single defensive strike before pulling back, a pattern documented when the snake has limited space to follow with additional bites. The camera misses the initial strike, but captures the immediate aftermath, a sharp jerk, the tub clattering to the floor, a hand lifted toward her collarbone as she stumbled back into the aisle. Blood appeared on the concrete and on the glove cuff. Later photographs showed 2 puncture wounds on the inner forearm, where the fabric split. The hook clanged on the rack and lay still. The clear shield bore a smeared mark. She moved toward the office and opened a drawer where she kept gauze and antiseptic. The partially unwound gauze and scissors on the desk indicated an attempt at basic wound management. Her phone remained on the opposite counter, undisturbed. The scene suggested she focused first on stabilizing the immediate area, standard practice at the facility, before her symptoms progressed too far for further action. Within minutes, the recorded footage shows her posture change. Speech, when audible on the brief recovered clip, had become slurred and her breathing quicker. Early neurotoxic effects often begin with subtle cranial nerve impairment, difficulty focusing, drooping eyelids, and unsteady movements. In the recording, the progression is visible. She steadied herself on the desk before lowering into a chair as limb strength declined. Over the next 45 minutes, the deterioration continued. The camera captured increasingly shallow breathing, intermittent attempts to reposition herself, and long periods of immobility. A trail of drops led from the office back toward the aisle and ended beside a folding chair. A bottle of saline lay on its side. The combination of rapid neurotoxin onset, lack of antivenom, and the facility's isolation left no practical path to the airway support required for survival. The footage recorded her sliding partially out of the chair a little over an hour after the bite. No further movement followed. A volunteer arrived after dark for a scheduled check-in when messages went unanswered. He found the office light on, the phone on the floor, and Selma slumped near the chair with shallow pooling beneath her arm. He backed away and called 911 from the road. Paramedics reached the property and confirmed cardiac arrest. Animal control officers secured the mamba using tongs and a transport box before transferring it to a permitted facility. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as complications of untreated neurotoxic envenomation with respiratory failure. The punctured glove, the displaced shelf, and the scattered hardware matched a structural failure during an enclosure move. Remaining animals were inventoried and relocated over the next 2 days. Regional wildlife officers documented the scene and noted the solo work, absent antivenom, and deteriorating rack supports. No broader penalties were issued. The rescue closed quietly. Neighbors collected her personal effects, and the camera's final clip, recorded after the property was cleared, shows the upper rack still a fraction low on the right bracket. A small mechanical fault that, in the end, set the rest in motion. It was August 4th, 2016, in South Jakarta, Indonesia. The night was heavy with damp air. The alleys behind the mid-rise office block nearly silent, except for the faint buzz of insects near a dim security lamp. At that hour, in the shadow of stacked crates near the loading bay, something stirred that would turn a routine shift into a fatal encounter. Raffi Hadiman was 41, a quiet janitor who had worked nights in the building for nearly a decade. Known for his steady habits and reliability, he rarely rarely spoke beyond polite greetings and spent most evenings moving methodically between floors with mop, broom, and bucket. His life was simple. He lived in a rented room not far from the complex, ate at the same street stall before each shift, and was respected among co-workers for his diligence. Rafi often accepted the solitude of night work, preferring the calm after tenants left, when the building belonged only to him and the guards. He took pride in his role, though it was unnoticed by most. His goal was steady income, not advancement, and he approached every task with quiet persistence. For him, working through the night in dim corridors felt ordinary, even when others remarked on strange noises or shadows by the garbage area. The loading dock sat at the back of the building, hemmed in by tall concrete walls and littered with plastic crates, trash bins, and scraps of food waste. Rats had become a regular nuisance, darting across the floor and squeezing through drainage gaps. Guards joked about something big hunting the rats, and just days earlier, grainy CCTV footage had captured a large, dark shape sliding near the garbage bins. Some workers speculated it was a python, a suspicion well-founded. Reticulated pythons thrive in such environments. Native to Southeast Asia, they are the world's longest snakes, often exceeding 20 feet. Though they prefer forests and wetlands, urban sprawl provides cover and prey in the form of rodents. A python this size is an ambush predator, lying in wait near consistent food sources. Its attack involves a rapid strike with recurved teeth, followed by immediate constriction, tightening coils with every exhale of the prey. Death typically comes by suffocation rather than broken bones. That night at the dock, when Rafi carried his mop bucket outside to dump dirty water, he paused briefly at the doorway, glancing towards the stacked crates. The security light flickered, and for a moment the shadows seemed deeper than usual. But treating everything as normal, he then stepped towards it. His routine felt safe, familiar, until it wasn't. At 2:15 a.m., CCTV cameras recorded the moment of attack. The bucket clattered onto the concrete as the python erupted from behind the crates, its body lunging forward with surprising speed. In the footage, Rafi staggered, arms splaying outward as coils locked around his torso. The python wound itself tighter, dragging him sideways to the ground. His kicks struck the floor hard, shoes scraping against the rough concrete. The constriction intensified within minutes. Rafi arched upward, his chest compressed under the snake's coils. His hands clawed weakly at the thick body binding him, but the python folded over his shoulders and neck. The camera captured his legs thrashing in wide arcs, shoes smearing streaks of dirty water across the ground. His struggles grew jerky, interrupted by gasps. The sound of his muffled cries carried faintly into the corridor, but the building remained silent inside. As the few minutes passed, his movements slowed. The footage showed his arms stiffening before dropping heavily against the floor. His legs continued with sporadic spasms, the final reflexes of a body starved of air. The python, steady and unrelenting, adjusted its grip, the thick muscles shifting visibly under the loading bay's dim light. The cameras caught the beginning of ingestion as the snake anchored its jaws onto his scalp before dragging him behind the stacked crates, out of clear view. At dawn, when Rafi's absence was noticed, a supervisor checked the janitor's closet and found his cart untouched. Reviewing the overnight footage revealed the attack in full. Police sealed the area by mid-morning, locating the python still nearby, its massive body bulging unmistakably with human remains. Authorities euthanized the snake before cutting it open to recover him. The office closed for 2 days. On the loading dock where he had died, co-workers gathered for a prayer vigil, standing quietly as incense burned and offerings were set on the ground. The building management reinforced trash storage and rodent control, while city officials reminded property owners that food waste and vermin attract predators into urban spaces. Yet even as Rafi's solitary night Jakarta ended in the coils of a predator, in India, a worker would ignore his wife's pleas, unaware that the cobra he boasted of kissing possessed enough venom to paralyze his lungs and stop his heart. It was May 13th, 2017, in a rural village in Uttar Pradesh, India. The day had been long and hot. By dusk, the village was quieting, but in the back shed of a modest grain mill worker's house, tension built unseen. Anil Singh was 34, a man whose reputation was split between his reliability at the mill and his troubling hobby. To his neighbors and co-workers, he was steady, a man who put in long shifts grinding grain to provide for his wife and their 2 young children. But But to those closest to him, Anil was stubborn, drawn to risk in ways that unsettled his family. He had taken to collecting snakes years earlier, calling it a symbol of luck and power. Despite his wife's disapproval, he kept them in small boxes stacked in a dark shed, boasting to co-workers that he could handle them without fear. It was a pursuit that fed his pride, even as it frayed the patience of those who cared for him. Handling snakes had become more than a pastime. It was his way of carving out a unique identity in a village where most lives looked the same. He told himself he understood their movements, that his experience gave him a mastery others lacked. That confidence made his decisions understandable, even if deeply flawed. He had survived so many close calls, so many brushes with striking hoods and bared fangs, that he convinced himself he could not be the one undone. The king cobra he kept was the largest snake in the shed, measuring over 11 feet. King cobras are the longest venomous snakes in the world, capable of raising a third of their bodies off the ground and delivering venom that attacks the nervous system, leading to paralysis and respiratory failure. Unlike smaller cobras, they do not rely on a single strike, but can deliver multiple bites in quick succession. Their hood display is not just for show. It is a defensive warning rarely ignored without consequence. Previously, neighbors had heard the hissing from the shed, urging Anil to let the animals go. A co-worker had walked away that very morning after watching him tap the cobra's hood with his fingers as if daring it to strike. Even his wife, standing often in the doorway, pleaded for him to stop. But to Anil, the repetition of these gestures without harm reinforced his belief that he had control. The risks were dismissed as the talk of people who did not understand. That evening, he decided to transfer the cobra into a sturdier wooden crate. His wife stood in the doorway, tense, repeating her pleas. His brother-in-law, visiting the house, lingered behind her uneasily. Anil used a pair of long tongs, lifting the snake from its box. At first, the cobra swayed, hood spread wide, body coiling against the steel grip. Then, with sudden precision, it twisted free and lunged, fangs driving deep into the back of his hand. He dropped the tongs instantly, grabbing his wrist, blood welling from the punctures. The snake struck again before he could retreat, sinking its fangs into his thigh as he stumbled back. His brother-in-law tried pulling him toward the doorway, but Anil's legs buckled, his face tightening with pain. His wife screamed as he collapsed onto the dirt floor, the cobra recoiling into the corner, still flared and watchful. Neighbors rushed over after hearing the commotion. With the help of two men, his brother-in-law dragged Anil out of the shed and into a cart. They pushed him quickly through the narrow streets to a government clinic 2 miles away. By then, his speech was already slurred, his body jerking uncontrollably. The clinic staff laid him on a cot and tried to stabilize him, but when asked about anti-venom, the nurse shook her head. Only basic medicines and intravenous fluids were available. King Cobra anti-venom was stocked only in larger hospitals hours away. Within 20 minutes of arriving, Anil's chest movements slowed to erratic gasps. His limbs stiffened in violent spasms before collapsing limp on the cot. Foam streaked his mouth and chin as his wife cried at his side, clutching his hand. The staff could only pronounce what had already become clear. Without anti-venom, there was nothing to stop the poison. He died moments later. The forest department arrived later that week, removing the surviving snakes and nailing shut the shed's doors. Notices were posted warning against private keeping of venomous animals, though most admitted such rules were rarely enforced. For his family, the loss cut deeper than any penalty. His wife abandoned the house entirely, moving with the children to her parents' home, leaving behind the dark shed that had come to symbolize his pride and his downfall. Anil's dangerous hobby ended in the lightning strike of his prized cobra's fangs, and in Florida, a biology student pinned the head of a giant python, not realizing the coils tightening around her chest could splinter ribs easily. It was October 9th, 2013, in the Florida Everglades. The late afternoon light filtered weakly through thick clouds, casting long shadows over the wetlands. The canals were quiet, broken only by the drone of insects and the splash of fish. By nightfall, one of the day's surveys would end in tragedy, a mistake that others had warned against, but that unfolded too quickly to reverse. Laura Martinez was 29, a doctoral candidate at the University of Miami, focused on invasive reptile ecology. She was regarded by her professors as organized and persistent, though her classmates sometimes noted that she carried herself with an edge of impatience. Her notebooks were detailed, filled with data from dozens of Everglades field surveys she had led over the past 2 years. She had built her reputation on being reliable and ambitious, hoping to turn her thesis this work into a career with the local wildlife commission. Handling large snakes was not her strongest skill, but she felt that demonstrating competence with field captures was essential for credibility. Laura's weekends were often spent balancing coursework with research trips into the wetlands. She logged long hours in the lab during the week and in the field on weekends, often at the expense of social time. Her motivation was clear. She wanted to show she could manage the dangers of invasive reptiles with the same confidence as seasoned trappers. The October trip was meant to be routine: survey a canal corridor, record sightings, and, if possible, attempt captures for tagging. She was joined by 2 classmates, both of whom trusted her judgment but remained uneasy about the risks. The Everglades that day were heavy with humidity, the air thick and still. Sawgrass bent sluggishly in the faint breeze, and the canal's water, dark with tannin, reflected the overcast sky. The first warning came when the students spotted movement along the bank. The snake was stretched beside a canal, its thick body patterned with dark blotches, head raised slightly above the grass. Burmese pythons, invasive to Florida since the 1980s, can exceed 18 feet and weigh over 150 pounds. They kill by constriction, tightening coils each time a victim exhales, crushing ribs and cutting off circulation. Though unprovoked attacks on humans are rare, any attempt to handle a python of that size carries serious danger. Field guidelines stress teamwork: 2 handlers for the body, 1 for the head, with all members prepared for sudden bursts of strength. One classmate hesitated, suggesting they record the sighting without attempting capture, but Laura argued that they had the opportunity to secure valuable data. The second warning was the snake's size: at least 16 feet, its girth too wide for one person to control. Yet Laura, intent on proving herself, volunteered to go for the head, while the others took the body. The third warning came from the python itself. When they edged closer, it shifted, muscles bunching beneath its scales. Still, they pressed on. Laura lunged, hands clamping just behind the snake's skull, standard procedure for snake capture. For a split second, it seemed secure, but the python bucked violently, twisting its powerful neck free. Its body whipped sideways, knocking one student into the mud before surging back toward her. In an instant, coils wrapped around Laura's torso, driving her to the ground. Her classmates rushed forward, grabbing at the python's midsection, but its muscles flexed with astonishing force. The first coil crushed across her chest, forcing air from her lungs with a wet gasp. She tried to wedge her arms between her ribs and the tightening loop, but another coil locked around her waist, pressing her spine into the ground. Her breaths came shallow and fast, her voice straining in short bursts as the snake anchored her body against the canal edge. The python's head darted past her shoulder as its coils tightened rhythmically with each exhale. Her lips began to fade from pink to blue, her eyes bulging with strain. One classmate dug at the coils with both hands, while the other slashed at the snake's flank with a pocket knife. The shallow cuts leaked blood but did nothing to loosen its grip. The python shifted, tightening higher, a thick loop across her ribs and neck. Panicked, one of the students pulled out a phone and called emergency services, shouting into the receiver as the other fought to free her. Dispatchers confirmed help was on the way, but the location deep in the wetlands meant any response would take time. Laura's face darkened, her movements slowing. The students shouted, their voices breaking, but the only sound from her was a strained rasp as her chest collapsed inward. Another coil cinched her throat, tilting her head sideways. Her body convulsed briefly, then stilled, pinned beneath the crushing weight. The knife struck again and again, deeper this time, until the python recoiled slightly, its grip faltering. It slackened just enough for the classmates to pull her partly free, but by then she showed no signs of life. Arms limp, chest immobile, skin blanched. Emergency vehicles finally reached the canal edge nearly 40 minutes later, paramedics splashing through the sawgrass to where the students waited. Their equipment and compressions made no difference. Laura had been gone for some time. Her life ended long before help could arrive. For her classmates, the aftermath was immediate and scarring. Their accounts, recorded in incident reports, were consistent. The capture had been rushed, warnings ignored, and once the python coiled, the outcome was beyond their ability to reverse. In the weeks that followed, neither returned to the field. One withdrew from the graduate program entirely, while the other completed coursework but refused to take part in further surveys. The university later included the incident in field safety briefings, citing it as a case study on the consequences of overconfidence during animal handling. However, even as Laura's scientific ambition ended in disaster, in Myanmar, a farmer would ignore warnings, stepping barefoot barefoot onto a wet embankment, resulting in an agonizing hour of convulsions and internal bleeding. It was July 19, 2015, on the outskirts of Yangon, Myanmar. The sky was heavy with moisture after a long day of rain, and the fields glistened under a pale moon. What began as a routine check of irrigation would, within the hour, leave a family broken, and a community reminded of dangers they had long tried to warn against. Min Thu was 47, a rice farmer who had lived his entire life in the same village outside Yangon. He was known among neighbors for his tireless work ethic, often rising before dawn and returning to his small home late at night. His reputation, though, carried another trait, a stubborn dismissal of caution. Where others wore boots in the fields, he preferred to work barefoot, claiming he could feel the earth better. Warnings about snakes drew little more than a shrug. He told friends that he had been in the paddies since childhood and knew how to handle himself. For Min, farming was not just survival, but legacy. He had 3 children and wanted to leave them fertile land and a steady livelihood. His routines rarely changed. He checked dikes, repaired embankments, and walked the same muddy trails daily. That evening, a leaking ditch threatened to flood a section of the crop. Despite nightfall and wet ground, he insisted on going out to fix it. His teenage son carried a lantern behind him, reluctant but obedient. The decision made sense to Min. Delays risked crop damage, and he believed he could handle the field as he always had. Russell's vipers, common in Myanmar, thrive in farmlands and grasslands. Averaging 4 feet in length, they are stocky, with a distinctive chain-like pattern along their bodies. Unlike many snakes, they rely on ambush, coiling in grass and striking with little warning. Their venom is one of the deadliest in Asia, destroying blood's ability to clot and leading to rapid bleeding, organ failure, and often death within hours. Farmers are frequent victims, their bare feet and ankles easy targets. Several warnings had been given in the days prior. Villagers had killed a viper near the fields, its body displayed as a reminder. Neighbors told Min to wear shoes, or at least carry a stick to test the ground. Even his son hesitated, asking if they should wait until morning. But Min brushed off each concern, saying the snakes killed more rats than men, and stepped into the dark, wet field. They reached the embankment where the water was leaking, and Min crouched low to inspect it. His son held the lantern high, its beam cutting through the grass. Just as Min shifted his weight to step onto the ridge, movement stirred beside his bare ankle. A Russell's viper, coiled tightly in the grass, launched forward with terrifying speed. The first strike landed just above his ankle, fangs punching deep. Before Min could recoil, the snake struck again, sinking into nearly the same spot. His son shouted, the lantern shaking wildly as Min staggered backward. The snake retreated into the grass, its patterned body vanishing almost instantly. Min clutched his leg, gasping. Within minutes, symptoms began. His breaths grew shallow, and he dropped to his knees. His son tried to help him stand, but Min vomited into the dirt. His skin paled, sweat glistening across his forehead, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. He tried to steady himself, but his legs buckled. The boy sprinted back toward the village, screaming for help. Neighbors rushed, arriving to find Min convulsing in the mud. His gums bled openly, streaks of red down his chin. His skin began to blotch purple, swelling grotesquely around the bite. One man lifted him into a makeshift stretcher, but his body jerked violently, blood pooling beneath him as he thrashed. Attempts to calm him were useless. His veins were flooding with venom that shredded clotting factors, his body bleeding internally while swelling outward. The convulsions grew worse, his limbs striking the wood of the cart. Neighbors tried binding his leg with cloth, but the bleeding spread from his mouth and nose. His son clung to his side, sobbing, as Min's body seized again, then sagged heavily. For more than an hour they struggled to keep him stable as his condition deteriorated, but by the time they reached the edge of the village, his breathing had slowed to shallow gasps, then stopped entirely. He was dead. The neighbors lowered him from the cart onto the wet ground. Lantern light flickered across his body, already still, his chest unmoving. His son remained beside him, crying. In the days that followed, villagers avoided the section of field where Min had been bitten. Some carried sticks when walking near the paddies, striking the grass before each step. Children were told to stay off the embankments entirely, and men spoke in low tones about the sound of Min's convulsions echoing in their ears. The spot where he collapsed became a place people skirted after dark, a reminder carved into routine rather than into stone. For his family, every walk to the fields passed through an invisible boundary where work, memory, and fear could never again be separated. Min One stubborn dismissal of village warnings resulted to his demise in the fangs of a viper. Meanwhile, in the Amazon, a fisherman would lean over his canoe, unaware that a green anaconda was lurking in the murky shallows. It was March 2nd, 2018, deep in the Amazon basin of Brazil. The rainy season had flooded the lowland forest, turning fields of tangled roots and understory into a maze of dark water. In the village along the riverbank, fishermen carried on their routines as they always did. But that afternoon, one of those routines would slip into disaster. Eduardo Pereira was 38, a subsistence fisherman who had lived his entire life on the river's edge. He was respected among neighbors for his steady hand with nets and his willingness to share catches with families in lean times. Eduardo's habits were shaped by the river. He rose before sunrise, checked lines, and often spent long hours in silence on the water. His strength was in consistency, though those close to him knew he also had a tendency to dismiss risks as exaggerations. He had grown up hearing stories of jaguars, stingrays, and snakes in the flood season, but he always said the river provided if one respected it, and that he knew its moods better than any outsider. Fishing was both survival and identity for Eduardo. With a wife and 2 children, his aim was simple: keep food steady and maintain the canoe and nets his father had passed down. During the high water months, fish often moved into flooded forest inlets, and nets snagged easily on submerged roots. The work was harder, the risks greater, but the catch was valuable. The inlet was still and oppressive, the canopy pressing close overhead. Branches drooped into water stained black with silt, and insects whined in dense clouds above the surface. Paddles dipped with muffled splashes as the canoe edged forward. In the shadows near the roots, water stirred in ripples that did not match the movement of fish. Green anacondas are among the heaviest snakes in the world, with females often exceeding 20 feet in length and weighing over 200 pounds. They are ambush predators, lying submerged with only eyes and nostrils above water. When prey passes, they strike with startling speed, wrapping massive coils around the body. Unlike venomous snakes, they kill by constriction, tightening with each exhale of the victim until breathing becomes impossible. Earlier, an older fisherman in the village had mentioned unusual splashing in side inlets and urged them not to set nets so deep. The cousins themselves joked about forest monsters when they saw ripples near the bank, but the laughter was uneasy. As they pulled closer to their snagged net, Eduardo waved away concerns, saying the movement was probably large catfish. He leaned out of the canoe with confidence, bracing one foot on the side and tugging at the mesh caught among submerged roots. The water erupted without warning. A massive green anaconda surged upward. In a blur, it wrapped around Eduardo's torso and yanked him from the canoe. The net slipped from his hands, the lantern glow vanishing into water as his body hit with a heavy splash. His cousins shouted, stabbing at the surface with paddles, but the snake coiled tighter, dragging Eduardo beneath. From above, they glimpsed chaos: Eduardo thrashing, arms clawing for air, his head jerking up once before vanishing. The coils spun him sideways, pulling him deeper. The water frothed with bubbles, then stilled for a moment, then broke again as his legs kicked wildly. His cousin screamed his name, but the only answer was the harsh slapping of water and the deep swirl of the snake tightening. One cousin leapt into the shallows with a machete, hacking blindly into the murk. He slashed at coils when they broke the surface, cutting shallow gashes that bled into the black water. Eduardo's face flashed into view once, contorted and desperate, eyes wide above the coils crushing his ribs. Then he was dragged under again. The machete struck water and scale, but the snake rolled, pinning Eduardo deeper into the mud. The struggle lasted only minutes, Eduardo's movements slowing quickly as the coils crushed tighter. His arms weakened, then stopped clawing altogether. The bubbles became fewer, then ceased. The cousins kept hacking, shouting, splashing, but the water swallowed their noise. When silence fell, the inlet seemed undisturbed again, save for faint ripples spreading outward. The snake's bulk disappeared into deeper water, carrying Eduardo with it. They waited, terrified, until at last the surface calmed entirely. Hours later, they returned with other villagers, probing with poles and dragging the area with hooks. When they finally brought Eduardo's body up, it bore the marks of the coils, deep bruises wrapping across his chest and arms, ribs crushed inward. Mud clung to his skin, his mouth open as if still gasping for air. The snake had begun to engulf his upper torso before retreating at the disturbance, leaving signs of partial swallowing but little progress. The villagers drove it off, but no one claimed to have seen it again. That night, Eduardo's family gathered by the riverbank. His canoe was draped with flowers, and candles flickered against the dark water. Neighbors stood in silence, offering food and support to his wife and children. There was little ceremony beyond presence, the river itself holding the memory of what had happened. Local authorities visited briefly, noting the attack but avoiding publicity. They told villagers that such events were rare, part of the forest's balance, and urged caution during high water months. For those who lived on the river, the warning was no revelation. They already knew the risks, and they knew Eduardo's death would be remembered less as an anomaly and more as another proof that even experience and confidence could falter against the hidden power of the flooded forest. It was August 12th, 2015, in a quiet neighborhood in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The late afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the well-kept lawns. From the street, nothing seemed unusual, and the houses looked calm. But inside one of the homes at the end of the street, an accident was quietly taking shape. Roger Halston was 45 years old and lived alone in his two-story house. He had been obsessed with snakes since his 20s, and over the years had built a collection of more than 50 snakes. His collection included large Burmese pythons, king cobras, and several species of vipers. He had changed his home to fit them, filling the basement with glass tanks, heat lamps, and other equipment. The air was thick with the musky smell of snake waste, which he considered a minor problem. Roger spent his time reading about snakes, keeping feeding logs and watching behavior, rarely leaving the basement for anything else. A week earlier, Roger had bought a rare white king cobra from a private seller. Known for being unpredictable, the snake was considered both a challenge and a prized addition among collectors. Earlier that week, a python had bitten him while he was fixing its tank, but he dismissed it as minor. That evening, he planned to feed several snakes at once, confident he could manage the risks. Friends and fellow hobbyists had warned him repeatedly against handling multiple venomous snakes at the same time, warning that even a small mistake could be fatal. But he ignored them. The basement was dimly lit, with heat lamps buzzing above each tank. Feeding containers and empty boxes were scattered across the floor, along with snake-handling tools and partially prepared frozen rodents. The aisles between tanks were narrow, leaving little room to move. The snakes themselves ranged from 10-foot Burmese pythons to adult king cobras, each capable of deadly defensive behavior if startled. Pythons squeeze with enormous strength, and venomous snakes like king cobras and vipers can strike quickly, affecting the nervous system or delivering tissue-damaging venom. Neighbors had noticed unusual activity in Roger's home. Some had seen large boxes of snakes arriving and were sometimes overwhelmed by the smell coming from his basement. A few had casually warned him about stacking tanks too high and overfilling his space. Local rules required secure handling and containment for venomous snakes. But Roger, overconfident in his experience, ignored the warning signs. He overlooked hissed warnings, defensive coiling, and repeated strikes at his gloved hands during routine feeding. At about 7:45 p.m., Roger began the feeding process. He carried several dead rodents into the basement, moving from tank to tank. The vipers were the first to react defensively. One viper jerked backward sharply when Roger's hand approached, narrowly missing a bite. Distracted, he stepped awkwardly, his foot catching the edge of a nearby python tank. The small python tipped over, falling with a crash that echoed across the cramped basement. The noise startled several snakes in the immediate area. One python lunged defensively at Roger's legs, followed moments later by another reacting to nearby movement. The white king cobra, sensing sudden disturbance, struck defensively at exposed arms and legs. Each snake acted independently, responding to vibrations, sudden motions, and unfamiliar sounds in its immediate environment. Other snakes coiled defensively or retreated to corners of the basement, avoiding direct involvement. A neighbor, Sarah Peterson, later reported hearing loud hisses, thuds, and breaking glass faintly audible through a partially open basement window. Alarmed, she called 911. Roger's struggle lasted only a few minutes. By the time help arrived, he was found unresponsive, partially coiled by one large python. Bite marks were evident from the king cobra, which had begun causing severe neurotoxic effects, and from several vipers. The floor was scattered with broken glass, bedding, and overturned feeding containers. 3 of the snakes were captured in temporary boxes, while the remainder hid in basement corners or dense vegetation near the house, out of sight. Security cameras from neighbors captured some movement and disturbances, confirming that the sequence of events, including slipping, tipping a tank, and startling the snakes, directly led to the fatal incident, though the strikes themselves were not visible. Investigators concluded that the bites and constriction were defensive responses, not a coordinated attack. Paramedics attempted to stabilize him while animal control worked to secure the remaining snakes. Despite their efforts to administer antivenom and provide emergency care, the combined effects of multiple venomous bites and progressive python constriction had already caused severe damage. The king cobra's venom affected his nervous system. The viper bites caused tissue damage, and the python's gradual constriction further complicated his breathing and blood circulation. In the weeks following the incident, the city reviewed private ownership regulations for venomous reptiles, imposing stricter containment and liability rules. Prospective snake owners were now required to obtain special permits, maintain secure enclosures, and carry liability insurance. The incident also prompted discussions about the ethics and safety of keeping large collections of venomous snakes in residential areas. Wildlife experts emphasized that these animals, while fascinating, require specialized knowledge, proper facilities, and respect for their dangerous nature. The chaos of handling too many snakes at once proved fatal in Florida. Months later, deep in the jungles of Pará, Brazil, another snake encounter would take a dangerous turn in the wild. It was May 3rd, 2016, in a remote village by the river in Pará, Brazil. The morning was foggy from the village. The river looked calm and slow, but the shadows along the water hinted at hidden dangers below the surface. André Silva was 32 years old and had spent years studying snakes. He was an amateur snake expert who worked with a small local zoo. He documented snake movements and sometimes caught specimens for research. He lived with his wife and young child, who he talked about often. He saw his work as a way to balance his interest in snakes with providing for his family. André was confident in his field skills and experienced with large snakes, but his confidence sometimes made him take unnecessary risks. He often went into thick jungle areas alone, believing his knowledge and strength could handle environmental dangers. That day, he planned to trap and measure a female anaconda that locals had warned was unusually aggressive. André had been tracking the river and its tributaries for weeks. He mapped snake locations, noted water depths, and recorded movements. He carried measuring tools, a small net, and a bag with snake handling equipment. He wore waterproof boots and lightweight clothing, but the forest floor was slippery and tree roots stuck out unpredictably. Despite these precautions, the thick vegetation and shallow streams created hidden dangers. The riverbank was soft and muddy, and the water often hid sudden drop-offs. The target of André's expedition was a female green anaconda that could reach over 20 feet long and weigh several hundred pounds. These snakes kill by squeezing, applying huge pressure until prey suffocates. While they are usually ambush predators, anacondas react quickly to threats, striking defensively if disturbed. Their muscular bodies allow them to coil and pull even large animals into water, where escape becomes difficult. Warnings had been frequent. Villagers mentioned unusual behavior from the anaconda, including getting upset when boats came near and sightings of her coiled near fishing paths. They told Andre not to enter the water alone or try to corner the snake, but he ignored these observations, trusting his handling techniques and experience with smaller snakes. He stepped into a tributary around 4 p.m., believing it to be shallow, unaware of a sudden drop-off hidden by murky water and water plants. As Andre waded in, his foot sank deeper than expected, causing him to lose his balance. He bent forward to steady himself, accidentally disturbing the anaconda, which had been coiled along the bank. Villagers on a nearby ridge saw him stumble and noticed the massive green body of the snake rising in a defensive posture. Andre tried to step back, but the anaconda's coils gradually wrapped around his legs and lower body, pulling him slowly toward deeper water. His bag and tools scattered into the shallows, creating noise and further agitation. The struggle lasted several minutes. The initial coil around Andre's legs restricted his movement, and each of his attempts to free himself caused the snake to adjust its position, gradually tightening its grip. His arms moved through mud and reeds, stirring the water, while the anaconda shifted defensively rather than aggressively hunting. Water rose to his waist and then chest as the snake's strength slowly pulled him farther into the tributary. From the ridge, villagers could see floating items, his hat, and scattered tools, but the details of the snake's hold were mostly obscured by reeds and murky water. Despite splashing and struggling, Andre could not free himself, and the surrounding brush prevented direct assistance. By the time local rescuers reached the tributary, the snake had released him and withdrawn into the riverbank vegetation, likely due to lack of movement or perceived threat. Only the coils remained briefly visible in the shallow water. Andre's body was never recovered. The river and its deep channels had hidden all trace. His measuring tools, net and bag, were found partially floating downstream, muddy and waterlogged. Villagers conducted a ceremonial ritual along the river, leaving offerings to honor his memory and the forces of the river, a customary practice for those lost to natural hazards. Later, the same anaconda was spotted but never captured, moving silently through the tributary system. The incident showed the dangers of underestimating the environment and overestimating personal skill. Investigators noted that the drop-off Andre had misjudged, combined with the snake's defensive response, created a realistic and fatal situation. From the rivers of Brazil to the remote farms of Queensland, encounters with large constrictors continued to turn deadly. Even in open pastures, the risks of handling powerful snakes could escalate in an instant. It was September 21st, 2014, in rural Queensland, Australia. The evening was humid and it had rained earlier. Storm clouds were overhead. From the farmhouse, the property looked calm. But on one edge of the land, something dangerous was about to happen. Luke McAdams was 29 years old and had worked as a farmhand on his family's property for most of his life. He lived with his partner and was responsible for taking care of the fields, livestock, and buildings. Beyond farm work, he was interested in snakes, especially pythons, which he kept in a small area near the edge of the property. Recently, he had gotten a 12-foot carpet python, which was unusually large even for that type of snake. Luke had spent weeks getting it used to its new home, feeding it and watching its behavior. He thought he could handle it safely. Though he had some experience, he sometimes took unnecessary risks, including checking on the snakes at night when it was hard to see. That night, Luke wanted to check on his snakes before the rain came back. He had already noticed minor scratches on his arms from handling the python earlier in the week, but he thought they were no big deal. His partner had told him to secure the enclosures properly and suggested waiting until daylight. But Luke ignored the advice. He wanted to make sure the snakes were fed and accounted for. He underestimated how stormy conditions could make the ground slippery and make it harder to access the outdoor pens. The enclosure area was an open space with a dirt floor that was muddy from earlier rain. The fence was low and reinforced with wire mesh. Each tank and pen had branches, rocks, and hiding spots for the snakes, but space was cramped and crowded. Light rain was falling, making surfaces slippery under the dim outdoor lights. The 12-foot carpet python's pen had a metal latch that was slightly bent from previous use. Its grip was weakened just enough that a moment of not paying attention could allow the snake to escape. Carpet pythons are non-venomous constrictors that can subdue prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around it. A large python of this size can immobilize an adult human over several minutes, gradually increasing pressure with each coil. Usually they avoid confrontation, biting only defensively, and constriction becomes effective slowly rather than instantly. Wrong moves, loud movements, or startled reactions can cause defensive strikes from even well-adjusted snakes. Earlier that evening, neighbors had seen Luke moving between pens in the dark. They saw him lean over the large python's enclosure and occasionally inspect the latches. Stormy weather made the ground slippery, limiting safe footing. The latch on the python's enclosure was slightly bent and loose, enough that a startled snake could push it open, though Luke did not notice the problem. At around 9 p.m., Luke bent down to check the python's water dish. His foot slipped in the mud, causing him to stumble forward. The slight movement was enough to startle the python. It slipped past the weakened latch and rose from the pen with a low hiss, initially coiling around his lower legs. Luke tried to step back, but the wet ground made him slip, and the snake tightened gradually as he struggled. The neighbors, watching from their farmhouse a few hundred feet away, could make out Luke's shape moving strangely and heard muffled calls, but the low light and distance prevented them from seeing any details of the struggle. The python gradually moved higher as Luke struggled, restricting his arm movements and compressing his chest over several minutes. Mud splashed, branches rustled, and his flashlight fell to the ground. The snake's actions were deliberate and defensive, responding to sudden motion and noise, not hunting. Slowly, Luke found it harder to breathe and move, the constrictor's strength increasing with each coil. By the time his partner reached the enclosure with a flashlight and shouted for help, Luke was completely unable to move. Attempts to manually pull the python off without proper tools were dangerous and often caused the snake to tighten its grip further. The snake remained coiled defensively around him. Emergency animal authorities were called, and when they arrived, they killed the python to safely recover his body. The scene showed the python's coils had wrapped progressively, with the ground churned in mud and water. Minor scratches on his arms and legs matched prior handling incidents, and disturbed plants showed the struggle had been real and went on for a while. The aftermath led to the temporary closure of the property's snake collection. Inspectors documented all enclosures, latches, and pens. Recommendations were made for secure containment, nighttime handling precautions, and additional training for anyone working with large constrictors. From rural properties to bustling marketplaces, venomous snakes continued to claim victims in unexpected ways. Even brief encounters in crowded spaces could turn chaotic and dangerous. It was June 7th, 2017, in the bustling Chalai market in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. The morning air hung thick with moisture from the previous night's monsoon rains. By midday, something would happen in one corner of this crowded marketplace that would change how venomous snakes were sold in Kerala forever. Ravi Menon was 40 years old. A lean man with calloused hands and deep-set eyes had been selling exotic reptiles for nearly 15 years operating from a small wooden stall squeezed between a spice merchant and a woman who sold jasmine garlands. Ravi lived alone in a cramped room above his shop. His only companions the dozen snakes he kept in wooden boxes and glass terrariums. The locals knew Ravi as a man who took dangerous risks. While other snake handlers used long metal hooks and thick leather gloves, Ravi preferred to work with his bare hands. He believed that direct contact allowed him to better read the animal's moods and movements. Customers would gather in small crowds to watch him lift cobras and vipers from their containers, mesmerized by his apparent fearlessness. Ravi had been waiting for this particular morning for 2 weeks. A wealthy collector from Kochi was coming to see his newest acquisition, a monocled cobra he had purchased from a dealer in Tamil Nadu. The snake was magnificent, nearly 4 feet long with distinctive eye spots on the back of its hood. It was also increasingly aggressive, coiling tightly whenever anyone approached its container and spreading its hood at the slightest disturbance. The marketplace that morning buzzed with its usual energy. The stone floor was slick with water and crushed vegetables, making footing treacherous in some areas. Monocled cobras are among India's most dangerous snakes. Unlike their larger king cobra cousins, they are smaller but far more aggressive when cornered. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and respiratory failure within hours if left untreated. In the wild, they prefer to retreat when threatened, but in captivity, with nowhere to escape, they become unpredictable and defensive. Experienced handlers knew to give these snakes plenty of space and always use proper tools. But Ravi had grown overconfident through the years, without a serious accident. Just 3 days earlier, a young boy had wandered too close to the cobra's container, and the snake had struck at the glass so violently that several customers had jumped back in alarm. Ravi had laughed it off, telling the boy's worried mother that the snake was just showing off. He had dismissed the incident as normal behavior, refusing to acknowledge what other handlers would have recognized as clear warning signs. The day went on, and Ravi arranged his stall carefully, positioning the cobra's wooden box on the counter, where the collector would have the best view. Inside the container, the snake remained coiled in the back corner. Around 10:15 a.m., Ravi spotted his customer making his way through the crowd. Ravi began preparing for his demonstration. He had done this hundreds of times before. Lift the snake, show its hood, demonstrate its alertness to prove its quality. When Ravi opened the cobra's container, the snake was already pressed against the front wall with its hood spread. Its tongue moved quickly, and its body was tight. Instead of staying in the back corner like usual, it was ready to attack. The cobra bit Ravi as soon as he put his hand inside. The snake moved very fast and bit his wrist above his watch. The pain went up his arm right away. Ravi tried to pull back, but the cobra held on and wrapped around his arm. People screamed and ran away, knocking over fruit and breaking bottles on the ground. The collector just stood there, shocked. For several seconds that felt much longer. Ravi fought with the snake around his arm. The cobra's hood was wide open, showing the marks that give these snakes their name. Every time Ravi moved, the fangs went deeper and more poison went into his body. Finally, Ravi hit his arm hard against the wooden table. This made the cobra let go and fall back into its box. The snake curled up right away. Ravi stepped back, holding his bleeding arm. You could see 4 holes where the fangs had bitten him. The market became very busy and loud. The spice seller next door tore a piece from a cloth bag and tied it around Ravi's arm. Someone ran toward the main road to get help, yelling for drivers to move out of the way. The collector was scared, but stayed calm now. He got down next to Ravi and pressed hard on the cloth as blood came through it. Ravi stayed sitting up, but his body was shaking. The feeling of no sensation moved past his hand. and his words were hard to understand when he tried to talk. The morning traffic was very heavy, so it was a small three-wheel taxi and not an ambulance that took Ravi away. The driver used his horn the whole time as people and motorcycles moved out of the way. At one point, Ravi's head fell to the side and the collector shook him hard to keep him awake. Doctors met them at the hospital door and took him quickly into the emergency room. They gave him medicine to fight the snake poison right away, but by then, Ravi's arm had grown very big with swelling. His skin had turned dark with marks that went past his elbow. The treatment saved his life, but left his hand weak forever. 3 of his fingers never got full feeling back, and his grip strength never came back. The bite changed more than Ravi's body. It changed the market. Local government workers said that all dangerous snakes must be kept behind locked walls, and they started checking the stalls without warning. Ravi's cobra was taken away and sent to a government snake research center. Months later, Ravi closed his stall for good. The small space was taken over by a vegetable seller, but people who shop there still pointed out to new people. That's where the snake man was bitten, they say. It is a quiet warning that even the most skilled handler can run out of luck. From crowded markets to remote rainforests, encounters with venomous snakes proved that danger could strike even the most prepared researchers. Isolation and unpredictable conditions only heightened the risks in the wild. It was October 18, 2018, near a research station outside Manaus, Brazil. Steady rain had left the forest floor wet and slippery, with mist clinging to the trees and rainfall masking distant sounds. Though the station looked calm, the flooded terrain was hazardous for anyone moving through it. Clara Fernandez was 27 years old and a herpetology student doing field research on venomous snakes. She shared a small cabin with 3 fellow students and spent most of her days cataloging species, measuring specimens, and recording behavior for her thesis. Clara was careful and detailed in her work, but she was known among her peers for taking calculated risks. She would work alone and sometimes remove gloves to get better touch observations. That morning, she planned to study a bushmaster near a flooded section of the forest, intending to record detailed behavior and habitat notes. She carefully packed her equipment: a handheld camera, field notebook, measuring tools, and her personal protective gear, leaving gloves aside for closer observations. By mid-morning, Clara had moved along narrow trails through dense vegetation. The forest floor was waterlogged, with mud pooling in low spots and small streams running unpredictably beneath her feet. Fallen leaves and submerged roots made footing uncertain. Birds were quiet, and insects were less active under the persistent rain. Clara noticed broken branches, disturbed leaves, and shallow depressions in the mud. These were signs that animals had recently moved through the area. She knew these were indications of nearby snakes, but felt confident in her knowledge and experience. Her peers had repeatedly warned her against entering flooded zones alone, particularly in areas known for bushmasters, but she believed she could manage a brief observation. The bushmaster is one of South America's largest vipers and can reach 10 feet long. Its venom is highly dangerous, capable of rapid bleeding throughout the body, tissue death, and low blood pressure. These snakes are ambush predators that generally avoid humans but will strike repeatedly if threatened. They are heavy-bodied and able to deliver precise, multiple strikes. They can adjust their position defensively when an intruder continues to bother them. Around 3:15 p.m., Clara reached a particularly flooded patch near a tributary. The water was murky, hiding roots and small drop-offs, and the mud was thick underfoot. She knelt at the edge of the water to examine tracks and take measurements. As she shifted her weight to steady herself, her foot slipped on a submerged root, causing her to stumble. In doing so, she accidentally disturbed a bushmaster hidden beneath leaf litter and shallow water. The snake reacted immediately, striking defensively. The first bite landed on her lower leg, puncturing the skin and causing sharp pain. Clara tried to step back, but the slippery, uneven terrain made it difficult to regain balance. Each movement sent vibrations through the water and mud, which the bushmaster perceived as continued threats. The snake struck again, biting her lower leg and calf in quick succession before recoiling into the leaf litter. While bushmasters do not squeeze like pythons, Clara's struggle in the mud and water slowed her movements and made retreat difficult. Her arms and hands disturbed floating debris and leaves, adding further stimuli, and her handheld camera and notebook fell into the water, partially submerged and catching glimpses of the tense scene. From a nearby tree platform, her fellow students could see splashes and floating items, but vegetation partially blocked their view of the snake. The encounter lasted only moments, but each bite injected venom, causing immediate local swelling and sharp pain. Clara focused on regaining her footing, the mud and water presenting almost as much danger as the snake itself. Clara was aware of the potential body-wide effects, including tissue death, low blood pressure, and blood clotting problems, but she had to first focus on moving through the flooded terrain while keeping herself upright. Field anti-venom kits were brought to the scene within 20 minutes. Clara received initial treatment from her peers while being prepared for evacuation. She was then airlifted to a hospital in Manaus, where doctors monitored her for body-wide poisoning. The bushmaster's venom had caused local tissue damage, swelling, and early signs of clotting disruption. Emergency care included giving anti-venom, pain management, and close monitoring of blood pressure. Over the following days, she underwent surgeries to remove dead tissue and prevent infection. Recovery required several months of physical therapy to restore movement and strength in her affected leg. The incident prompted a reassessment of fieldwork rules at the research station. Solo work in flooded areas was banned, and mandatory protective equipment, including gloves and stable footwear, was required. Equipment handling and communication rules were revised to ensure students remained in visual or radio contact at all times. Clara's partially recovered camera footage and field notes were preserved for research and safety training purposes. The incident showed how quickly a combination of environmental dangers, defensive animal behavior, and human error can escalate into a dangerous situation. Her movements, although instinctive, provoked a realistic defensive response from the bushmaster, highlighting the delicate balance between observation and safety in field research. By the end of the season, the research station had implemented stricter guidelines and incorporated the incident into safety briefings. Clara's experience became an example for new students of the importance of staying cautious, using protective equipment, and respecting both the environment and the animals being studied. Her careful documentation and survival reinforced the value of preparedness, emergency response, and measured risk-taking in the field. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.